Today is an exciting day because it's been about 2 years in the making. I've literally been modifying and tweaking my Lightroom presets for 2 years, trying to get them to a point where they're super easy to use, but at the same time have that high quality look. And it's finally time to release the Matti Haapoja 2019 Lightroom presets. Also, I don't know if you guys can see, but there's a bandage on my neck and also on my arm. Because I got some plastic surgery done. Some of you may have seen this little bump on my arm. It was just a lipoma, totally fine. And then also this bump on my neck, got them removed. So if you were one of those commenters worried about either of those, we're okay. It was a little bit weird holding this container full of random tissue from my arm though. Anyways, I'm super OCD about the way that my color grades look or the way the colors look in my photos. And that's really why I've taken so much time to really tweak these and to make them right so that I feel really good about them and putting them out there for you guys to use also. And for this preset pack, I didn't want to do a whole bunch of wildly different looking presets because let's face it, that probably means that you're most likely not gonna use most of them because you do want to kind of keep your Instagram looking uniform or your thumbnails on YouTube looking uniform. You don't want to be using this preset and then this preset the next time that looks completely different from the last one. I want my brand to look really uniform, and that's why all of these looks, they're different, but they're in the kind of same family of cinematic teal and orange, but different versions of that. And I was really paying careful attention to skin tones because I think that's where a lot of presets just go wrong. They're too heavy-handed or they're manipulating things too much, and then the skin tones just don't look too natural or appealing in my opinion. They're just too strong, and that kind of throws off the skin tones. And the other thing that I wanted to focus on is making these as easy to use as possible, and that means that the preset would do the most of the work for you, the bulk of the heavy lifting. All you really need to do is just tap that button, add that preset, and you're 90%, 95% there. Sometimes literally all I need to do with these presets is just click the preset button and it's like, I could post that. Now I am a bit OCD and I'll still go in and tweak minor things, but most of the look happens instantly when you apply that preset. Obviously it depends on how you shot it. If it's crazy overexposed or underexposed or your camera didn't do a good job white balancing, then you're gonna need to tweak a little bit. But if it's a decently taken photo and the exposure is decent, it's gonna look really good immediately as soon as you add on that preset. But enough talk about how much I like these presets, let's put them to actual use. And in honor of the new Lightroom preset pack, I want to show you guys how I edit my photos, and it's a lot easier than you would think. I've actually never done this kind of video, so I hope you guys appreciate seeing the behind the scenes, and hopefully you guys will learn something, and then at the same time see how easy these presets are to work with. So first off, you need to just install the presets. Super easy. You just use this plus button right here, import, you're ready to go. You'll have a little section there, MH presets, and then you're ready to use the presets. And now we can scroll through the different looks. There's 15 presets total in this pack, and we can see that some of the looks are a little bit heavier and then some of them are a little bit more subtle. Any of the presets that say easy, that means it's a little bit more subtle, and I try to name my presets to kind of give you an idea of what that preset is gonna do, because sometimes it's frustrating when there's just like a random name, and I've done this before, when there's a random name to the preset and you have to apply it to find out what it does. This way it gives you a little bit of an idea of what that preset is gonna do before you even apply it. For example, dark teal, it's a little bit more of a dark, moody teal look, a cool look. It's one of my favorites of the pack. Also, somebody I think on Twitter was saying that that would be a great name for a villain. I would have to agree. My brain just likes the logical nature of calling the presets what they are. So dark teal is great, but if you want a more subtle look, we can use easy touch skin only, and this one really just makes the skin tones pop. It kind of desaturates everything else, makes it look nice and cinematic, but it really brings out the skin tones in a subtle way. Both of these are really cool looks, and they have a lot of the same things built into them, but then the final product is a little bit different. The dark teal is a little bit more heavy, and then the easy touch skin only is a little bit more subtle when you don't need as much of a look to your photos. You just want it to look more natural. All right, so when we're getting to editing our photo, the first thing we're gonna do is ask what kind of mood or feel or look do we want for this photo? Do we want it to be more cool tones or warm tones? Do we want it to be a subtle look or a little bit more heavy-handed? Where are we posting it? Are we putting on Instagram or YouTube thumbnail? Because those all dictate how I'm gonna edit this. Let's say, for example, I'm gonna put this on Instagram, and on Instagram right now I have this kind of cool tones, cinematic look with still some pop to it, and I've found that the dark teal preset works really, really well for these. So because I've been using that preset on my Instagram, I'm gonna keep things uniform and we're just gonna add dark teal. Boom, you're done. Hit export, upload that to Instagram, and you're ready to go. That's it, guys. Okay, I'm joking, but look at the difference. Just with that one click, right away, we have a really, really nice starting point. I'd say like 90% of the work, if not 95% of the work, is done for you instantly with that preset. And honestly, you could post this to Instagram and probably people would love it, but we wanna get that last 5 to 10% of quality, and we're gonna go in and tweak some things. First off, we're gonna look at white balance, and I'm just gonna look at the image. Does it seem warm or cool? And what do I want it to be? In this case, I think I want it to be a tad bit cooler, so we're just gonna move over the temperature slider a little bit over to the blue. And pro tip here, if you hover your cursor over a slider, you can just use the arrow keys to really precisely move the sliders. I'm not gonna touch the tint slider in this case. I think it looks pretty good. The only time I really use the tint is if I wanna change the look of it a little bit more. For example, I want it to be a little bit more greenish in tint, but then after that, I'd have to really play around with the skin tones and stuff like that to get them to the right place again. Next, I'm gonna look at the tone section or exposure. And what I do is first look at the skin tones because that's the most important thing. So I'm gonna look at my face, and to me, the exposure looks pretty good. So I'm not gonna change the overall exposure here, but I don't like how bright the sky and the mountains are in the background. So we're just gonna simply take down the highlights. And if you didn't know, the highlights and shadows kind of affect the mid-tone ranges of your exposure. So the brighter mid-tones, the highlights, and then the darker mid-tones, the shadows. And then the whites and the blacks, they affect the brightest parts of your image, the whites, and then the blacks affect the darkest parts of your image. And because I dropped down the highlights, it affected the skin tones a little bit, so I'm just gonna bring up the shadows just a little bit. Now the exposure of the skin tones looks pretty good again, but I think I want this to be a little bit darker, a little bit moodier, so we're gonna bring down the blacks just a little bit. And then again, because of that, we're gonna have to raise the shadows just a tiny bit to get the exposure properly again. Whenever you're changing one thing, it's probably affecting more than you want, so you kinda have to go back and forth and tweak this thing and then that thing a little bit to get things to the right place again. That's looking really good, and now we can go to the present section, and you can see that I haven't actually, in the preset, done anything with these. And the reason for this is two things. First off, I think if you just add clarity, a lot of times it goes overboard really quickly. And then the other thing is that I like to apply these locally instead of just doing it for the whole image, which we'll get to a little bit later on. Then let's look at the saturation. And because we added a little bit more contrast, I think I'm just gonna take down the saturation by 1 notch. And then I think the vibrance down a tiny bit also. Yeah, I don't know. This is kind of personal preference. You might want more saturation or less, but this is the look that I want to create right now for my Instagram. Then you have your tone curves, and this is where a lot of my look happens, but I don't tweak this once I've put on my preset. Once I've made that preset, I don't touch these tone curves really at all. I like using the other tools to adjust afterwards. If you want to change the look, you totally can, but I'm gonna just ignore this section for now. It is a powerful tool, and like I said, it's doing a lot of the work for the look, especially with contrast. But because I kind of have it where I want it, I don't wanna mess around with that too much. You can really quickly mess up the look if you don't know what you're doing with the curves. Then we get to probably the most important section, the HSL. And the first thing that I'm gonna look at is the skin tones. And the skin tones here are looking pretty good, but as small as this sounds, it looks a tiny bit too green for me. So I'm literally gonna take the orange hue, just like down one notch. Yeah, I think one notch is enough, or one notch towards magenta. And then the skin tones I think could pop a little bit more, so I'm gonna go into the luminance and I'm just gonna boost the exposure just a little bit of the oranges. And that made the skin tones just a little bit less saturated because we brightened it up, so I'm just gonna add a tiny bit of saturation. Now the skin tones are looking really nice, but I think there's a little bit too much blue, and I find a lot of times if the blues are too saturated, it kind of makes it look whatever the opposite of cinematic is. So we're just gonna take down the saturation of the blues a little bit. And then also we're gonna change the hue of the blues a little bit more to the teal area. But at the same time, we're gonna take the aqua and move it over to the blue a little bit more. I think that's a little bit more true to life than what it was looking like before. Now, depending on the photo, I would use HSL to change all sorts of colors. But in this case, I think the skin tones, and actually all the time, the skin tones are the most important thing. And those are looking really good. Mostly just blue tones other than the skin tones, and I think the blues are pretty good now too. Split toning, again, I don't really touch. This again is a part of making that initial look. You can increase the look or decrease it a little bit or manipulate it just a little bit, but for me, I like the way dark teal looks. I'm just gonna keep the split toning as it is. Detail, I'm just gonna add a tiny bit of sharpness. Again here, don't go overboard. And I wouldn't add too much sharpness because we're gonna do that in the next step, which is the local adjustments. So pretty much all of the other settings down below, I'm not really gonna be using those too much. Sometimes I change the vignetting a little bit if it's just way too much, but I kind of just ignore all of those other settings. But local adjustments. These are basically just adjustments that we're gonna make to certain parts of the image instead of the whole image like we have been doing up until this point. Two things we're gonna do here. First off, I still don't really like the look of the sky and the mountains, so we're just gonna add a graduated filter, which is basically just kind of like a gradient. So you're selecting a whole area and then there's a gradient to where it kind of disappears. You're not affecting, your changes aren't affecting the image anymore. So we're just gonna make a graduated filter here for the sky and the mountains. And we're gonna take down the exposure, but then add a tiny bit of clarity. And that's mostly because I didn't like how much it was drawing the eyes to the sky instead of to my face, which is where I want the viewer's attention to go immediately. Then I'm gonna take the adjustment brush and I'm just gonna brush my face. To see what you've brushed out, you can use the show selected mask overlay to see what parts you've brushed or where you've gone a little bit too far. And basically what I wanna do here is make the face pop a little bit more. So we're gonna add a little bit of clarity, a bit more sharpness, and then we're gonna take down the highlights a little bit, but bring up the whites just to make a little bit more contrast on the face because contrast is gonna draw the eyes. And then let's just add a tiny bit more saturation again to draw those eyes in right to that face because that's really where you want the person to be looking in this photo. And now I think it's looking pretty dang good. I mean, we were great with that preset already, but now we've got that extra 5 to 10% of quality. And notice how I was doing really, really small adjustments. Pretty much all of the adjustments I did were very subtle. I bet on YouTube, you probably didn't even really see some of the changes as I was doing them because they're so subtle. But that's, I think, how it should be. When you have a really great starting point, you don't need to make really big adjustments. It's just minor little tweaks to get that last 5 to 10% of the quality out of that photo and out of your preset or out of your look. When the starting point is good, don't go overboard, but I am OCD enough that I'm gonna tweak some things for sure. Okay, let's do one more example really quickly. This video is probably already super long. I appreciate you watching up to this point. And if you have any comments about my workflow, questions, or some add-ons that you do, let me know. I would love to read some of those. Okay, so this photo right off the bat, we can see is a little bit overexposed. And let's use the grunge teal look here. It's a little bit more of a raw, grungy, film-like look, has some grain in it. And right away, you can tell that it's not looking too good. But don't worry, this is gonna be really easy to fix. All I'm gonna do is go to the exposure and we're just gonna drop it down to minus 0.5. And it's already looking really good just by changing the exposure because I overexposed this photo when I took it. But just dropping down the exposure a little bit, the preset right away looks really great. But again, we're gonna do some minor tweaks. We're gonna take the blacks down just a little bit and the highlights also down a little bit. White balance and tint look pretty good to me. Obviously, it depends on what look you're going for. If you want a more warm look, then you can change the temperature, but I'm liking this. I'm just gonna add a little bit of saturation. In the HSL section, it's looking pretty good. I'm just gonna take down the blue saturation again a little bit. The blues are just attacking those mountains a little bit too hard. So we're gonna take that down. And then we're gonna up the yellow saturation a little bit. I feel like the jacket's looking a little bit weird right now. We're gonna brush the face and the hands. We're gonna bring up the clarity, add a little bit of sharpness to it, a bit more contrast, and now the exposure seems to be a little bit darker, so we're just gonna bring the exposure up a tiny bit. And then I'm just looking at the photo, the sky looks a little bit too bright. Again, it's drawing the attention too much. In this case, I'm just gonna use the brush and brush out the sky. And then we're gonna take down the exposure and the highlights down a little bit. And then we're just gonna decrease the clarity a little bit because we dropped the exposure. It was making it a little bit too menacing. So we're just gonna take down the clarity and that's gonna soften things up a little bit. Again, so it doesn't draw too much attention. There it is, before and after. Crop it 4x5 and export, and you're ready to post that onto Instagram. Super easy, super fast. And again, I basically could have just put the preset on, changed the exposure a little bit, and we would have been 95% of the way there. But some little tweaks make it even better and we get to that 100%. All right, so that is how I edit my photos, and those are my brand new Lightroom presets that I've been literally working on for like 2 years. I hope you guys love them as much as I do. They've been really, really nice to use on my Instagram and my YouTube thumbnails and all of that stuff. So I hope you guys enjoy them as much as I have. And I'm gonna be doing some sort of competition with the people who do buy them. I wanna see what you guys are doing with these presets, how you guys are using them. So we're gonna do some sort of photo contest. I think on Discord, we'll have a section where you can post your own photos, get feedback, give feedback, and then we'll choose a few people to win some sweet prizes. But more on that in the next couple weeks. For now, I just wanna say I really appreciate all of your guys' support, and to all of the people who do end up buying these presets, I wanna say a massive thank you. I really, really appreciate it. Okay, I hope you guys learned something, enjoy the presets, and I'll see you guys later. Oh, and don't worry, the surgery didn't hurt. It was totally easy. It does sting a little bit now, but I'm fine, I'm tough.